All right, well, it's time for us to start. And we're not having our typical class today. If you came prepared to discuss James, we'll do that next week. By the way, the questions for next week are in the back. If you've not already got those, look for those. Today, Tim Norman is with us. Tim is working with the church in Manhattan, New York, and we are thankful to be able to support Tim in that work. Tim and I have known each other since before I moved here. We met several years ago in Arkansas and worked together in a lectureship, and I've always admired his work and look forward to hearing. This morning, the elders have asked him to report on the work in Manhattan. I think it's always good to know what's going on and understand that, and I've had some connections to that group before, and the work there is a little different than what we have here, and so I think that's powerful for us to do. I'm going to lead us in a prayer and then turn that over to Tim so he has the most of his time. Will you bow with me? Almighty God, we are so grateful for today. We are thankful for the opportunity to gather here as your children, your people, and to worship you and to encourage one another. And we're grateful for Tim to be here today. We're grateful for the work he does in New York City, and we look forward to hearing about that work. As we go into this report, we pray that that work will continue to prosper and that many souls will be saved. And we also are mindful this morning, quickly, of those who are sick, and especially Katie. And we pray that you would bless her and be with her family, and especially Austin this morning. We ask all this in your son's name. Amen. Tim?
Well, it's so good to be with you. Is this on? Okay. I never thought that I would relate to the following. Point. Green Acres is the place to be. Farming is the life for me. Land spreading out so far and wide, keep Manhattan, just give me the countryside. Counterpoint. New York is where I'd rather stay. I get allergic smelling hay. I just adore a penthouse view. Honey, I love you, but give me Park Avenue. The chores, the stores, fresh air, Times Square. Now, it's interesting how they resolved that issue. Oliver Wendell was the husband and Lisa was the wife, and so she went off to the country with her husband. We live in, of all places, Manhattan, New York, and if you can't imagine doing that, neither could I or my wife 3 years ago. But I'm so thankful that you helped me in the work there, because I hope as a result of our time together this morning, you'll see it's a very needful work. Let me begin by introducing my family to you. So you'll know the Normans. I'm there in the middle. That's my beautiful better half there, Tammy in the middle. That's my oldest child, Bella, or Elizabeth. My middle kid, Sarah. And then there's that bouncing baby boy in the back, some of y'all may know. Nathan is my oldest kid's husband. Then Tim is married to my middle girl, Sarah. And then you know Victoria. And we've got the grandkids. We've got Mary, who's our oldest, followed by Junebug Norman. And then we got Zoe, Joy, and then we got Ada Lee. So that's the Norman clan, and I appreciate so much y'all helping me do what I do. About 2.5 years ago, we sold the house. We had 3 cars at the time. We just bought a brand new car, and so we hadn't sold we always kept 2 cars. We hadn't sold the third one yet, so we had 3 cars, but we sold all those. We loaded up the truck, and we didn't move to Beverly, but we did move to Manhattan. Let's talk a little bit about New York City, and I'm going to go fairly quickly because there's a lot to cover. Hopefully I won't go too fast. In the New York metropolitan area, the greater New York City area, there are approximately 20.1 million people. It's a huge population. New York City, if you're not already familiar with it, has 5 boroughs. There's the Bronx, which is to the north of us. There's Queens, which is to the east of us. Brooklyn, which is to the south of us. Staten Island, which is really to the south of us. And then there's Manhattan. So let's key in on Manhattan a little bit. Manhattan, first of all, it's an island, and we may have some compatibility issues. They've converted this from an Apple program to a PowerPoint program, so hopefully not too much trouble. But if you'll notice right there in the middle, you can see that that little long stretch of land is surrounded by water. And Manhattan is an island. It's 13.4 miles long at its longest, and it's 2.3 miles wide at its widest. And on that island, there's a population of 1.629 million people. Lots of people. And I don't know if my math is accurate here or not, but I know this. I got this offline. 66,940 people per square mile. And then if you divide that by the footage in a mile, which I may be making a mistake, but it seems fairly close in my past accounting wisdom, translates into 12.69 people per square foot. Now, how in the world do you do that? Well, you stack people. And if you'll notice there, the little yellow ball there on the bottom, what I'm going to do is look at Manhattan from that perspective up the island. So that's the way you get 13 people per square foot. You stack them on top of one another. And that's just your typical Manhattan picture I took. And I think pretty much, with maybe one or two exceptions, I've taken all these pictures. So that's looking up from the bottom of Manhattan straight on up. This picture is looking at what we just saw is in the distance. Now we're looking south from Midtown Manhattan. And then we're going to turn around and look from Midtown Manhattan up towards the Upper West and Upper East Side and into Harlem. And that little, it's kind of hard to see, but that little green, there's a little stretch of green back there. That's Central Park. And the yellow area represents where we worship and where we live. So let me key in on that. Here is your typical map of Central Park. Central Park, well, I'll talk about it in a little bit, but I don't think people could survive New York City without Central Park. Central Park is a wonderful, wonderful thing. But the green is Central Park. Those who decided to do that were very wise. That's where we assemble. Just to give you some relative locations, that's where our first apartment, we've had two apartments now. We lived in for 2 years in one apartment, and we just moved into another. So that's where our old apartment was, and that's where our new apartment is. So the congregation we work with is the Upper West Manhattan Church of Christ, and I think you can understand why that's so. If you get beyond Central Park, it's called Harlem. It's really from about the top of the park, really down to the end of the park is what they call the upper side, either Upper West Side or Upper East Side. From the bottom of the park, there's distinctive measurements, but you have the Midtown, and then you have the lower Manhattan. But this is where we live and roam and have our being. So let's talk a little bit about living in Manhattan. In these kind of presentations, I kind of say, what would I be interested in? And how do you live in Manhattan? Let's talk about, first of all, dwelling places, housing. Now this is a 12-story building, and this was our original apartment building, and we lived on the 9th floor. Just to give you a little feel for what it was like, this is from the elevator going down the hall to our apartment, which is the door at the end of the hall. On the other side of that door, you had a small foyer, a very small foyer. And just to the side there is the hallway you look down. So that was the hallway of our first apartment. Right behind that picture to my right is the living room. Behind that picture to the left is our bedroom. The first door you see is the bathroom. The second door you see, or opening you see, is the kitchen, and the door, at the end is the spare bedroom. And so that was pretty much the apartment. It was cramped, but it was nice. That's our living room. We had amazing windows. People would come and just drool over our view. This was looking out of our windows to the east and to the south. We missed that a little bit. That was one of the more endearing parts of that apartment. Our bedroom was pretty small. On I guess you would say my right is an air conditioner unit, and Tammy would literally, to get to her side of the bedroom, would have to turn side and scooch this way. But it was adequate. I'll tell you a little interesting story if you haven't heard this. Literally, the first night we stayed in that apartment, I woke up sometime in the middle of the night, and I saw this. And so I got my phone out and I took a picture of it. And then I said to myself, what do you do if you get stuck between the moon and New York City? I said, I know it's crazy, but it's true. Oh, well, I tried. It's early. Storage is at a premium in Manhattan. I knew I was living in a different place when I came to realize that our box spring was just a box and it was hollow and you could put stuff in it. That's a different world than where I come from. No attics, just to stick stuff in. That was in our kitchen. This is the view outside of our kitchen window, definitely. Some of these older buildings they built to prevent what they thought they needed to do to prevent tuberculosis, so they kept a lot of airflow going, and it makes for some interesting designs. This was our spare bedroom ready for guests. And just to give you some idea about our first apartment, it was no more than 900 square feet. There's no place at all to put a dining room table. Very little storage. They only required a $32,800 security deposit. Now, COVID, one of the blessings of COVID was that they made it mandatory that you could only keep 1 month's rent as a security deposit. So I didn't know, I had no clue, and all of a sudden one day a $28,000 check shows up in my mail, which I was very glad to get back because that's the down payment on whatever house we may sometime buy in the future. And the rent was, you could get this spectacularly luxurious place for only $4,230 a month. So that was place number one. Now this is looking out the bedroom window of our old place. And we're going to end up moving to where that arrow, that window is our apartment we're in now. So we didn't move very far. We moved from there down to here. And we did so for 4 reasons at least. Number one, it's a much larger place. You have some breathing room, and that's very important. Room to breathe is good. It's, interestingly enough, less expensive. I mean, there were so many people that left New York because of COVID and some other things that the prices of apartments plummeted. So we actually got this apartment for about $700 a month less. And it's much nicer, it's larger, it's less expensive. It has an outdoor terrace, which I'll show you. Don't ever take your backyard or your front yard for granted. The fact that you can just go out and stand in your yard, especially during a pandemic where you don't have to put a mask on. I mean, in our world, if you walk out the front door, you're in hostile territory. So it's nice to have a place where you can actually go outside within the parameters of your own, the place you live, and enjoy the outdoors without having to dress up and get out and walk 1.5 miles or so. And it also has a gymnasium inside, which is I'll show you a picture of, and that's important for me, especially during the winter. I've got some health issues that I deal with, and so show you the new place. This is the new building. I didn't take that picture. It seems a little fancier than it actually is. But that's a 25-story building, and we're now on the 14th floor. See, our foyer is a little bit bigger. You have a little more room. One thing we noticed was this used to be a hotel, and apparently in redesigning it for apartment purposes, they had to get to the actual apartment, they had to have a hallway that got you past the stairwell. And if you'll see, the hallway is pretty long and it's pretty wide. And so what we were able to do is to buy 6 IKEA 7-foot bookcases and line this hallway. And so now I finally have a place for my library. Before this, I didn't have any, my books were in storage in the main or in an office that they had that really was not usable. And so now we call this the Hall of Knowledge. So it's really nice. And then you get past the end of the hall. There's our apartment. There's my shoes that I should have picked up. Anything that's left out is my fault. So there's the living room. The kitchen, we lost some size, and the kitchen and the bathroom are smaller here, but the bedrooms are just humongous by New York standards. There's there's some designs of this space on other floors where they've subdivided this into 2 rooms. And the rooms are still nicely sized, but that's the spare bedroom. And we're still in the process of changing things. We're going to make half of it's going to be the guest bedroom, and the other half is going to be my office, and there's plenty of room to do both. That's where I'll set up shop once we get it all finished up. And then our bedroom, again, same layout, but it's big. That's where our bed is. And basically, the bed, what you see there is free open space, a lot of breathing room. And this is looking out the bedroom window, and there's the other apartment that we moved from. So that's the new place we're at, and we're very happy to be there. No cognitive dissonance at all, no buyer's remorse. Haven't regretted it at all. Here's the terrace. It's so nice. You go up to the 21st floor, you walk out, and there's a place where you can, without having to, like I said, get all dressed up to go out. Where you live, you can go outside and enjoy the fresh air. That is really, really, really nice. And this is looking straight out. I didn't take the former picture, I took this picture. This is looking out the terrace at the Hudson River, so it's really nice to be able to go and sit and enjoy. And then they have a gymnasium, as I said before. It's nice. It's there in the basement. It's more than adequately furnished. Only problem is I have to actually make myself go work out in it. So we're set up as far as living. We've improved our lot tremendously. Thankfully, there's good and bad, and one of the good things in the bad COVID pandemic is the fact that we were able to upgrade our living. Now, I don't know how long we're going to be able to afford to live there. It depends on how fast the economy bounces back and how high they raise the rent. So we may only be there a couple of years, but we're going to enjoy it while we can. How do you get around in New York City? Well, the one with the backpack is my beautiful bride. You walk, and that's why I don't know about you, but if you'll notice my shoes, they're not fancy dress shoes that I really prefer. These are practical walking shoes. You walk everywhere. You walk, you walk, you walk, you walk. You walk when the weather's good. You walk when the weather's bad. You walk. Wherever you go, if you buy something, you have to remember you got to carry it home. And so there's a Trader Joe's about 9 blocks or so from where we live. But whatever you buy, you got to carry home. Otherwise, you got to get a cab or a Uber to get yourself home. So you walk a whole bunch. Now here I was, this wasn't too long ago when it was still cold. I was ready to go to worship. Had Tammy take a picture of me. So this is the front angle. Now notice the side angle. That backpack weighs about 40 pounds. And so one of the frustrating things about being a preacher there is in renting space that by the hour, which is what we do, we rent our space by the hour, is that every service you have to set everything up. Don't ever, I won't go into it again, but don't ever, with about 100 evers, take that sound room for granted. Imagine having to tear down all that stuff every time you worshiped and set it up the next time you did. That's basically what we did. I'm going to get me something that gets progressively heavier. I'm going to get something I can roll, but you got to walk, and sometimes you got to carry a lot of stuff in doing so, but it's good for you health-wise. You can take the subways. Subways are, in theory, very, very nice. They get you pretty much wherever you want to go. I really don't miss having a car very much at all. That's me and my dad, and this is the inside of a subway with my daughter, my oldest daughter, and my oldest grandchild. Subways they're pretty nice. COVID's made them not as safe or as clean as they once were. You can take buses. This is us one early morning before it dawn, getting on a plane going somewhere. But they have public transportation that is nice. We're actually discovering trains. I mean, if you're a Southern boy like me, you heard about Amtrak, and it was a theoretical thing that you knew was out there, but it never impacted your life. But actually, it's pretty nice. If you can take trains places, it's a pretty nice way to get from point A to point B. So that's the way you get around. Now, what are the disadvantages? Now, look at that picture. What do you see? You see a whole bunch of trash. New York City is a trashy place, and I want to talk about the disadvantages, and then we'll talk about the positives. First of all, it's a dirty place. It's interesting, they don't allow you to use the plastic bags in grocery stores like you do at Walmart here. Those are not good for the environment, and I understand their point. But in New York City, you don't have alleys, you don't have dumpsters. So the only way they can get their trash out from all of these sky rises is to pack them up in plastic sacks and set them out on the street. And so New York generates an incredible amount of non-biodegradable waste. And what happens is they've made a lot of bottles redeemable. So people will go through there tearing up all the sacks at night to find the bottles, and they don't put all the trash they take out back in, and then the people that pick up the trash, they don't pick everything up, and so it ends up looking dirty like you just saw. And plus, I'm amazed. We were driving around yesterday, and there was just little flower spots all around here, well manicured, real pretty, really nice. And in New York City, you just sit there and why doesn't somebody take a high pressure spray washer and do some cleaning up? I don't get it, but they just don't do it. It's a dirty place. It's a crowded place. It's a crude place. I mean, when you go outside and deal with a culture, typically it's an R-rated experience. I mean, the other day we went to the park with some friends, to the zoo in Central Park with some friends, and a woman dropped her iPhone, and I understand that being an irritating experience, but she just proceeded to drop, and I pardon the phraseology, but F-bombs, just one after another after another. And finally I said, "Madam, there are children here," and then she started F-bombing me. And finally she said, "What are you going to say about that?" And I just told her, I said, "Nothing, you've said it all." But that's just the way life is. I mean, it's just the way it is. It's a very crude place to exist. People tend to be kind of rude, and I'm growing sympathetic with that. It's a tough place to live. The way I put it is, when you live in Manhattan, what Manhattan does to you on a daily basis is it comes up and it boinks you. Just about 6 or 7 times a day, it boinks you. You know what? After about the third or fourth boink, I'd be kind of irritable and rude too. So I mean, it's a tough place to live. It's a dangerous place. When we moved there, it was one of the safer places in America to live, and now it's not. The people are being cut and stabbed on the subways at a rate twice as much as a year or so ago. So we used to not even think about getting out and going places, but now we do. It's a difficult place. Nothing's easy there. I mean, here, if you want to just go do something, you get in the car and you just go do it. Like I needed to pick up some glasses. So if you want to pick up your glasses, you go to the optometrist, you pick up your glasses, you go home. You don't think twice about it. I won't go through what I had to do to get my glasses, but it's just a tough place to live. It's expensive. The winters are long, they're cold, they're dark. It's like no place I've ever lived before. It's like a whole other country. It's definitely not the South. I mean, you do feel like you're in a foreign land. I mean, they speak the same language basically, but it's just not home. It's a very secular place, and what I mean by that is a godless place, and it's a lascivious place. They're pushing, the government proactively pushes disrespect for God, and the people do too. I mean, on the subway, they have the rainbows on all the subways to push that agenda. And people there bask in it. I was out running last week, and there was 2 ladies sitting on a bench just making out. And I mean, that's just the world that you live in New York City. And I think what we need to do is, instead of sitting there saying, how could they be that way, we need to watch out and repent, because if we don't, the South will be where they're at now in 50 years. And you can feel very isolated up there. They had a preachers get together finally that I was able to attend in Elmira, New York. And I finally met some fellow preachers in the area, and there's quite a few churches in the area. But if you can get feeling pretty lonely up there, and so those are what I would call the disadvantages. But there are, quickly as I say that, let me suggest to you there are certainly some advantages. First of all is the food. The food is amazing. And after COVID, I came to realize why food is so good in New York City. If you live in a concrete jungle, you can't just stay in your apartment. You go crazy. So you have to be able to get out and do something. But there's very little that you can do. And one thing they can do is get out and eat. And so there's a lot of competition for food and for food dollars. And if they're going to survive, they've got to cook it well. And the food there is amazing. And I've benefited from that tremendously. There are museums that are amazing. This is the Met. It's just incredible. There are cultural things. We've got one of our members plays the violin for the New York Philharmonic, and she got us tickets one day. You know, the theater, if it's appropriate, those can be very fun. What else we got? Seasonal things. There's some really cool seasonal things you can do up there that you don't have other places. I love flowers. If you are my friend on Facebook, you'll know that I love flowers. They have botanical gardens there that'll just knock your socks off. The Bronx Zoo is really cool. You can go do that, and that's kind of fun. There's historical things. I mean, this never grows old. So there's a lot of positive things that you can draw from when you live in New York City, and probably the biggest positive of all is Central Park. And I took all these pictures. This is just the way it is. This is fall time. But it's an amazing thing because you're in this concrete jungle, and 1 second, and you take the next step, you're in this beautiful park. And you need Central Park because you got to get back to nature a little bit, and this affords you the ability to do that. We spend a lot of time in the parks. And I think the people understood that if they're going to live in a place like Manhattan, they needed a place to get away and get back to nature. So there are some advantages. Now, what was Manhattan like in COVID? It was tough. The first year we lived there, it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. Then COVID made it tough, incredibly tough. Now, this is not translating, so I won't even attempt to, but it's a letter from one of our members right at the height and the peak of the COVID thing, and she was talking about having to deal with dead bodies, and she's a nurse, and it was the epicenter of the COVID crisis was in New York City and New Jersey, and it was really tough. And then along came the protests, the racial issues that arose, and this was a parade or a demonstration for that, and it made life very unpleasant, very difficult. But slowly it started to ease up. This is the only place we could get out early on was we sat out on our fire escape, and then the super let us get up on the roof. I mean, it was really tough. There wasn't much place you could go. You just had to sit around your apartment for weeks on end. But they finally started lightening up. They let people eat on the outside, and they got pretty creative about doing that. I thought this was pretty interesting. They had these bubbles. We ate in one of those. It was pretty good food. But they take masking very seriously, more seriously than you would imagine. I mean, they mask everybody. But even today, I mean, right now what I'm doing, I cannot tell you how pleasant what I'm doing right now is. I'm speaking to you without a mask on. I still preach with a mask because the hostel requires it. So it's a different world up there, and the mask has become a political thing. If you're conservative, you don't mask. If you're liberal, you do mask. And, I guess I'm moderate in terms of masking. I think it has its place. I think that you can get carried away with it too. But they take it very seriously, and if you're going to fit in and become all things to all people, then you got to respect what they do. Now, here's the biggest advantage of all. It's the Upper West Manhattan Church of Christ and its people and the kingdom that we can work together in. Just take a second. I want to show you that this is the church. This is a transition from Keynote to PowerPoint issue. This normally wouldn't happen here. That's the first half of the church. Here's the second half of the church. Beautiful people, beautiful people. Let me just summarize my experience with the Upper West Manhattan Church of Christ. Obviously, racially very diverse. I love that. Culturally diverse. Just because your skin color is the same doesn't mean your culture is the same. You have people from all kinds of different cultures. We have people from Africa, from Asia, from North America, obviously, South America, Europe. I think we have everybody from Antarctica and Australia continentally represented. Different religious backgrounds, and that's interesting. Different personal backgrounds. We have people that have come out of what's the word? Come out of like the Bloods and the gangs. And one of our members, you know, if you're familiar with tattooing and what a teardrop means, we have a beautiful soul who has a teardrop. Christ changed. And when we preach about homosexuality and lesbianism, we talk about 1 Corinthians 6, where it says, "Such were some of you." We have people who have repented of that sin. Just to love the people. Before COVID, we were averaging 65 on Sunday, 19 on Tuesday. We're solidly back into the 40s. We're hitting the 50s. We had 56 and 50 not too long ago. And we're back averaging about 18 on Tuesday night. So we're getting back there. The difference is largely that the tourists haven't come back yet. And we still have a few holdouts that aren't attending because of risks. We don't have elders, we need them, but a very spiritually minded group of people. They're unified. And what's interesting is about up in that neck of the woods, there's so few Christians, members of the church, regardless of some of the things that we talk about in our differences, that you need each other. You know, if there's only 50 of you, you find a way to work it out. If there's 5,000 of you, then, well, you can have this group that does this thing, and this group does this other thing, and they don't talk to each other. You don't see that as much up north, and I like that a lot. Very evangelistic, and the fields are ripened to harvest. The challenges we're facing right now is our seating capacity and parking. Parking, it's more dangerous to use the subway, so people are driving more, and they're finding that since more people are driving, there's less places to park. And so some people are getting frustrated and going someplace that's more automobile accessible. So that's something that I had never thought about, but we need to try to handle that problem. Me quickly running out of time, I knew I would. This is where we meet, the hostel that we meet at. We rent the basement of that building. I think I pressed the wrong button. We put up a banner for every service outside. They don't let us keep them hung, but we can hang them during services and during the same day. We put this in the foyer. This is the actual place that we meet, arranged before COVID. They cut down on the capacity quite a bit during COVID, but that's where we meet. That's getting ready to worship pre-COVID. Nobody has face masks on. This is during a worship service. This is me preaching during a worship service. To have a child's class, they cordon off a portion of the room with blankets, and looking down on it, they're having the kids' class during the adult class. And this is getting ready for worship after class, and in the yellow in the background, that's the cry room. So don't ever, again, with 100 evers, take cry rooms for granted. Don't take classrooms for granted. Don't take anything for granted. So that's where we worship. That's the Tuesday night class. I don't know why they started Tuesday. I think it may have been the only place that was available, time was available. They give us a half a closet to store stuff, so we don't have to take everything with us every time. And this is the group that would come out before COVID. We'd gather on Saturdays during good weather and hand out flyers. And this would be an example of the front and the back of the flyers we would hand out. We've had some baptisms. This is Trinidad being baptized. She's the lady between Tammy and I there. This is Mark being baptized. This is Erica being baptized. This is Ben being baptized in our kitchen. We've been borrowing the West Harlem's baptistry, but we decided to use our own, and so we set it up in our kitchen. And then I thought, was our bathtub big enough to baptize somebody in? And this was the last baptism we had with Brandon. And he's about the maximum size man or person you can baptize in that bathtub. But we got him under. So been evangelistic and been successful. We need to do more, certainly. Now, things ended on March 15th, 2020. We were basically banned from our space. Don't take a building for granted, because we rented by the hour and they could cut us off, and they did. So what we did initially, like a lot of people did, was we just did everything virtually. But then we decided, well, we need to get people thinking about meeting again. So we started having singings in the park. These are some things we did during the strictly electronic portion of post-COVID life. We started singing in the park in May, and we did that for several weeks and to get people comfortable coming out. Then we actually started worshiping in the park. This was really cool. And in August, we started worshiping in the park, and it was really cool watching the people walk by and see their response. What I was impressed about was how positive it was. Nobody really ever was very negative at all. We'd have people stop and listen, and so it was really cool. I thought that was a neat experience. But then we went back into the hostel that was me preaching there. You don't get as dressed up there as you do here. It's a different environment. So we resumed meeting in the hostel in October under very strict conditions. I still have to wear a mask. We resumed our Tuesday singings in December, so we're almost back. We haven't got our child's classes back again, but we need to do that quickly. Just some of the things to do weekly basis, put out a bulletin, as most people do. I try to share my handouts, my sermon outlines when appropriate. Try to hand out class materials for each class. We have Facebook Live everything. We have that's Facebook. I send out on a weekly basis. I send out our bulletin, and if you would like to get the bulletin or the handouts, class handouts or the sermon outlines, just let me know. I'll add you to our list. But there's the live broadcast on Facebook. We have our website, so we have all those standard things. And I do my monthly report, but usually about every 3 months I do my report. So look for that and read it if you would. Keep you posted on what's happening. Now, brethren, what I would say to you, and I can't say this enough, and it's amazing. I think there's something going on because my son-in-law's, my Nathan Bartlett, Chuck Bartlett, he works in St. Louis, and he says he's busier like he's never seen it before. I think COVID is causing a lot of people to rethink spirituality. But except for Manhattan and Brandon, pretty much everything on this list are people that have come to us in the last 2 months, and we're not having tourists yet. It's just amazing. I mean, I'm busier than I've ever been, and it's wonderful. I mean, you don't have to look for people to study with up there. They come to you. And really, there's more work than week, and that's a great problem to have. So the fields are ripened to harvest. Let me just conclude this way. It's expensive to live there, but I think the opportunities presented on a per dollar basis make it an excellent investment. I mean, a dollar spent in New York might reach 10 people, whereas a dollar spent somewhere else might only reach 2. So yeah, it's expensive, but you get a lot of bang for your buck, so to speak. I'm trying my best to be a faithful steward and appreciate your trust and confidence in me. First year I tried my best. I resolved I was going to be quiet and listen and learn. In the second year I was going to start trying to be helpful, contributing my thoughts and things, but COVID interceded, and that just threw us all off course a little bit, but I'm trying to get back there. Still trying to adapt to the needs of a unique place. It's a different place from where you come from, for sure. I could definitely use help. I mean, there's a couple of congregations in New York. West Harlem is a congregation about the same size as ours. They have 4 preachers. The church in Brooklyn has 2 preachers, and we just have 1. And I could use help. The fields are ripe. And then one of our greatest needs and greatest long-term needs, in addition to having elders, is a bigger meeting place with ample parking. But when you're dealing with Manhattan, that's almost a fairy tale. I mean, we figured during COVID, and even now, when there's so many open, so many vacated business spaces, that somebody would be willing to make a deal. But, something we would need would cost us $10,000 a month or so. It's just beyond the pale. But God is powerful. He can do all things. And so we would pray for your continued support and prayers. Thank you for it, more than I can say. It means more than I can communicate. And what I want you to understand is that in helping me preach the gospel there, you're helping others. And your labor is not in vain. So thank you so very much for all that you do for us. And let me say, as a parent, thank you for being what you have for Caleb and Victoria. I can't express our heartfelt thanks the way I want to, but thank you so much. We've got a couple minutes. Does anybody have any questions? Anything? All right, well, thank you all very much.